Villeneuve did go on to qualify on pole, having been let back into the meeting effectively, with Schumacher alongside him on the front row and Eddie Irvine third in an updated Ferrari that was clearly back on the pace. But the start of the race was bizarre as Villeneuve backed the pack up from lap 1. He admitted afterwards that this was in the hope that the cars behind would attack Schumacher, and he even said that as he knew there was a chance he would lose his own result, his main focus was on trying to impact his title rival's race. Matt, what do you think of Villeneuve's approach to these early laps?
It was worth a go. I can see the logic. I suspect if anyone else had done this to Williams, they'd have been extremely self-righteous about it being done to them and very up in arms and an example of like terrible underhand Ferrari tactics. I saw the logic, but went on way too long, as I'm sure we'll discuss in a moment. There was a point at which you bail out of that, and that is when your championship rival's team is taking control of the situation out of your hands, and that happens really quickly. So why Williams and Villeneuve then persisted for such a long time and completely destroyed their own race, that is the bit that annoys me even more, I think, than the yellow flag nonsense. It's just complete idiocy on all sides to think. It's just, so frustrating for someone who at that point was desperately hoping for a Villeneuve championship to see how him and his team were shooting themselves in the foot trying to be clever and just not following it through properly.
To me, this felt like a bit of a Villeneuve unravelling at a crucial moment when the championship's kind of there to be sealed. Because if you remember the hybrid era 2016, so I'm taking us out of V10s, apologies
That's a risk.
to the purists. When Hamilton had a vague shot at denying Rosberg the championship, he did that go slow Abu Dhabi finale where he was trying to back Rosberg into the other cars and it just didn't quite work. And he was basically like, well, what else could I do? I needed him to finish worse than second if I was going to win it. In this case, you've got the reverse scenario. Villeneuve's got this massive lead. He can almost get the championship done if he can just outscore Schumacher in this race. He's leading the Grand Prix, but he's just driving in his mirrors, trying to push Schumacher back into the pack. He's totally focused on one guy, whereas the simplest way to try and win the championship is just to try and win the race, finish ahead of Schumacher. I just feel like he's not thinking clearly.
I think it's a desperately inelegant thing to do because one of the outcomes could have been that you compromise Schumacher and Schumacher finishes behind some people he wouldn't have done otherwise. Well, if Villeneuve's going to say finish ahead of him or gain points or whatever, there's going to be a court of appeal at this stage because they've appealed against the yellow flag thing. But if he had impacted Schumacher's race, then that would have factored into the appeal, had the hearing ever happened.
Yeah,
and they'd have just said, well, not only do you have to have the one race ban, but you've got to have another race ban because you impacted the fight in that race where you shouldn't have been there. So I feel Williams and Villeneuve needs to be a bit more subtle in how they went about doing this. Now, there could have been an outcome where Schumacher ended up in the gravel trap, I guess, and it might have been a bit harder to argue, but it'd be a very easy argument to make. Say, well, he was caught behind Villeneuve. He was driving very clearly way slower than he needed to because he was like seconds off the pace he should have been, like 4 seconds slower than the warm-up or something. So it would have been a very, very easy case to argue. So I think influencing the race because you know you're not going to be able to keep the result is a legitimate strategy, but I think you needed to be way, way, way more subtle about it because I just don't think it could work, notwithstanding the fact it didn't work anyway.
Yeah, it's like they drove the race knowing they weren't going to win the appeal if it ever happened, rather than just...
I think that's true. I think, you lodge the appeal, you keep yourself in the weekend, and you worry about it afterwards. There was going to be no case at the appeal because the evidence was you kept your foot down past the yellow flag. So it's kind of amazing that he was allowed to do it, and it's also it is a huge risk, and this never dawned on me at the time really quite how sort of underhand and naughty this was. Like if this happened today, if you had one of the title rivals racing under appeal and then just their entire focus is on trying to mess with the other guy, there'd be complete outrage about that.
I think social media would have many nuanced and very eloquently put critical analysis to this. But yeah, and that's why I think it's so odd because it's like you've got your hand to play, but you play it so obviously. It's like basically Villeneuve's whole, certainly the first part of the race, is just a massive tell on what they're doing. So you'd have nothing to argue anyway if they then talked about it. I think Mosey did refer to the fact after that if they'd gone ahead with it, there was a chance they'd have got an extra penalty. So yeah, I think from the moment they lodged that appeal, there was never an intent to go through with it. It was just in order to have Villeneuve as a chess piece on the board in the race.
Yeah, keep yourself in the way for the rest of the weekend. So with Villeneuve slowing the pack, Eddie Irvine took matters into his own hands. He'd fallen to fourth behind Mika Häkkinen at the start. He then passed Häkkinen and Schumacher around the outside in the S's to move into second on lap 2. And a lap later, he passed Villeneuve around the outside into the chicane to take the lead. This didn't change Villeneuve's plan as he let Irvine drive away and continued to focus on holding up Schumacher and the pack behind. Irvine built up a lead of nearly 13 seconds before making an early pit stop, and he said afterwards it was then just a case of waiting for the phone call from Ferrari. That came when Schumacher jumped Villeneuve at the first pit stops, and Irvine dramatically backed off his pace. He let Schumacher through, then inevitably held up Villeneuve, and he did such a good job of that in the end it probably cost Irvine second place on the day. Ben, looking at what the task was here for Irvine, was this his best performance as Schumacher's number 2?
Reluctant as I am to ever give Eddie Irvine too much credit, I think in terms of following instructions, yes, helping your teammate, doing everything you can to influence that race to the benefit of Schumacher. But there's commentary at the time, it's like, wow, Irvine's, where's he come from? And he's done this amazing double move in the S's and blah, blah, blah. But the circumstances are so weird. I think Martin Brundle calls them bizarre. And it really is. It's hard to give him too much credit for what he does, because it feels like Schumacher, knowing he's being impeded by Villeneuve, kind of helps Irvine pass both Häkkinen and him in one go. And of course, the move on Villeneuve into the chicane is great. It looks quite ballsy round the outside, under braking, etc. But as we've just discussed, Villeneuve at this point is kind of a ghost car in the race. He feels like he's going to get booted out whatever happens. So he's not really trying to fight Irvine. And then there's this kind of weird scenario where Williams decides to change tack because they think, well, Irvine's actually going to win this race for Schumacher, so we need to speed up and try and influence it. So the whole thing is it's mental, absolutely mental race. And Irvine's kind of just a pawn in that, really.
It's Irvine's early laps that makes me resent Williams' handling of this so much. Williams creates a situation where Eddie Irvine can make 3 world champions look stupid. 10 world championships between them. 2 of them he passes around the outside of a fast corner at Suzuka. And then
4 seconds a lap as well at one
point.
It's
just so nonsense. This is what I meant about Williams needing to see immediately. You've got this wrong. You've let the guy who can now let Ferrari control this race get away. Speed up, overtake him again. You've got nothing to lose. Take Irvine out. You're not in the race anyway. I don't think. Yeah,
imagine if he'd done that.
Yeah, Irvine's move is great. Irvine's pace is great. Clumsy from Ferrari to not get Irvine into second, or maybe Irvine just wasn't quick enough. I'm just getting annoyed talking about this because I think Irvine looked artificially way better than he should have done, but because Williams wasn't seeing an interesting plan through properly, and then in the end, Irvine should have driven faster as well. So just everyone, apart from Michael Schumacher in this race, it's just rubbish.